Hello YouTube, welcome back to the channel. So we're back here for another episode in I guess this little mini series that I'm going to do. I've got about 5 or 6 of these issues, so I'll go through various ones. If I find some stuff that is interesting, I thought this would be a good one to follow up my first one, which was the May 1991 issue of Beckett Baseball Monthly. We're going to go into October 1991, later on the same year, and you can already see the design of the magazine has changed to a different design that would change again later on down the road. So this is already within the same year. We're already seeing some small changes. I also did see some major price shifts in a few of the cards that I looked at in the first issue in this series, and I think the next one that I'll go into is into 1992, so we'll get a chance to see if there's any other changes related to some of that. But I'll keep referring back to some of these cards just to see what the prices are doing as far as that time is concerned. So this is, I think, about 5 months after the previous one, so still within a fair bit of short period of time of the last episode that we did on these, but at the same time we've already had the National happen, so the 1991 National in Anaheim, which was the record-breaking National at the time. Now, before I get into going through this issue here and talking about a handful of things that I see in there, I did get a pickup in the mail. It was just 2 cards from the same seller, combined shipping, which is always handy. And it is the 06, 07, and 07, 08 Black Diamond Ruby Parallel. Both of these are numbered to 100. So we got the jersey that I never really was a big fan of, the old motorist jersey, if anybody remembers that nickname. So these are numbered to 100. But nonetheless, it is one that I need as far as filling in the rainbows for those late aughts sets. And Black Diamond was always a favorite of mine. Here's one that I prefer a little bit more with the uniform on there. This one here is the 0708. And you can see they also included the serial numbering in red, which I think was a little bit better, because this one here you got the simple silver. I think the red is a little bit nicer. It pops off there a little bit more. But regardless, they're both the rubies out of 100. Add 2 more to the Medano collection, filling in some of the rainbows. And I'll do a quick update. That puts me at 2,523 different Mike Medano cards in the collection, with 2 more serial number ones adding to that. Now let me put that aside and let's get into the issue here. As I said, this is October 1991. And by this point now, we've got Frank Thomas here as the cover athlete on that. The next issue is also Frank Thomas. So in this early 90s period, Frank Thomas is dominating. Because if you go back and look at where we were during that time period, Frank Thomas came up, his big card was 1991 Leaf. I'll actually look at the 1991 Leaf here as well, just to see what the pricing is looking like. And you can already tell at that time that he was going to be a special player, and he was already building his way. He hasn't done the back-to-back MVPs yet, which will all come later. Regardless, though, by this point, he was already showing flashes of that, and actually in the 1991 season, he was 3rd in MVP voting, so he was already starting to showcase some of those hitting skills that were going to eventually make him a Hall of Famer. As you can see from the cover there, you've actually got 1991 O-Pee-Chee Premier Baseball. And what's funny about that is that O-Pee-Chee Premier was when they started separating between O-Pee-Chee and the Topps just being basically a replica of each other, where the O-Pee-Chee brand was borrowing the Topps one. They still had that in 1991, but at the same time, this was a situation where you started doing the O-Pee-Chee Premier. You did that in hockey, but this would be like a second-year Frank Thomas. But nonetheless, it was just kind of interesting they included that one. So let's get into it here, and we'll start off with this 1991 Studio, which was a fun set if you remember that one with the different portraits. You got the Dave Winfield there and a couple of different ones. Dave Justice, Ryan Sandberg. Who else we got? Darren Daulton, Dwight Gooden, and Frank Thomas. So, of course, got to follow that theme. Here's another ad for the various Beckett books as far as the different price guides are concerned. One other one I actually wanted to mention briefly in there that I thought was kind of an interesting one. I don't remember if I mentioned in the first one, but one of the things in this ad included is the baseball address list. So if you see there, there's a book for that. And that's actually a list of 10,000 mailing addresses for most major league players, both active and retired. So, you know, I think today, you know, that would be a little bit frowned upon, but obviously there are resources to get access to addresses like that. So looking here at the index, we've got a picture of Jose Canseco hanging out with a youth choir. It was kind of funny because by this point he was already getting, and they reference it here, he's received his share of negative press lately, and Jose Canseco's career would be nothing if not controversial for the majority of it. But by 1991, they're already making references to it. So a lot of different stuff we're going to look here. We got an article is going to come up here about Hank Aaron, which is great. And we've got some references here. So Frank Thomas, what sophomore jinx? Question mark. Frank Thomas has convinced collectors that his brief and powerful tenure in Chicago last season was a preview of bigger things to come, which would turn out to be bang on. It was very much the case. As I said, back-to-back MVPs, but that was to come later on. So a lot of the usual stuff at the beginning here. We've got a Future Stars. Beckett focused on Future Stars for that magazine at that time. Frank Thomas on that cover too. And here's some more about Frank Thomas, which is great. Got the cover for that. This was an interesting article here. I'm not going to go into it too deeply, but and this is something Beckett used to do really well. They would pick on some kind of theme or an idea, and then they would play off of it. So if you look at it across the top, they would have all these decades, starting with 1941, 51, 61, 71, 81, and 1991. And they would talk about some of the different things that were happening at that time. Starting with the 1941 season, where you've got the Ted Williams hitting 406 and Joe DiMaggio hitting in 56 straight games. And you talk about some of that, and you include pictures of some of the cards like this, which is great. And then you would have some other articles that would follow up on it. So some more related to that, some more Joe DiMaggio and Ted Williams cards, really good stuff. And you would just keep going on with the articles. We've got an ad here for baseball draft picks for Classic. So that's another thing that would be included in there. And here we move forward to 61 and 61, talking about Roger Maris and the chase for the then home run record. And you can see here, moving on, even the victims of Maris's record-breaking season don't agree on whether he belongs in Cooperstown. So this is 32 years ago, and we were having debates about, does Roger Maris belong? All those things related to it, especially at that time. It's kind of interesting. And then we move on here, talking a little bit more Roger Maris. Now here is something that was very contemporary. Here is an article talking about this, and I'll read you this bottom part here. Being in the pennant race after All-Star break is a refreshing change for Atlanta, bolstered by bold moves and some great young guns. The surprising Atlanta Braves are out of the basement and back in the race. Now, this issue is October 1991, but nonetheless, we hadn't gotten through the playoffs yet, and in the 1991 World Series, this upstart Atlanta Braves team would go on and play Minnesota in what was a classic World Series, if you remember that one. You can actually find, I'll see if I can find the link for you. You can actually find, I think, Game 7 on YouTube. There's like MLB Vault or something like that. If I can find it, I will share it with you in the description. And you can go watch that game. That was the classic Game 7, where Jack Morris outdueled a young John Smoltz. It was the first time Atlanta got to the World Series and lost in the 1990s, which would become a recurring theme for them. They would win the World Series in 95, but this was their first real shot at it, coming basically out of nowhere, which is very interesting. And it just referencing it as far as this piece is concerned, and showing some of the different players that were part of it. You got Otis Nixon, and you got Ron Gant, and you got John Smoltz, who I just mentioned, and there's a Tom Glavine picture. So kind of interesting that they would make reference to it. A lot of stuff going on with it. And here's an interesting one. So you got two-time Gold Glove winner Terry Pendleton had solidified Atlanta's hot corners, and then he went Upper Deck High number was released. He was beginning to make a run at the NL batting title. Now what's interesting about Terry Pendleton is I believe he ended up having the distinction of being 0-5 in World Series appearances. So just hard luck for Terry Pendleton. Kind of a dubious distinction, but nonetheless, it is notable. Now, going over here, we got Front Row, the premier edition of that. So we've got a lot of sets like that. Here's another one. The premium card didn't begin with Upper Deck. Remember something called Magic Motion, talking a little bit about that. We got the hot and cold list, like I referenced before. Now, let me go into a couple of cards that I mentioned I was going to look at, same as I had done in the first time we went through this. So 1952 Topps, let's go find our good friend here, the Mickey Mantle, number 311. And if we go over there and we take a closer look at it, what you're going to see is you're going to see Mickey Mantle is there, and it is now with an up arrow at $20,000 there, if you can make that out. And that is already an increase, because if you remember the previous video I did, it was $9,000 with an up arrow. That was May 1991 issue. This is October 1991 issue, and you already have that kind of movement there on the Mickey Mantle. So you saw some crazy movement. That was the early 90s for you. And this, actually, if you think about it, other than obviously the National being the biggest one and everything, this was we had already reached the zenith, the apex of really that. Within the next couple of years, we're going to have the baseball player strike and a lot of those things coming in, and a lot of this would just come crashing down. But it was funny that in 1991, we're still feeling the effects of that apex period. Now let's go forward here, and I'm going to look at two other cards. I did mention that I was going to look at the 1990 Leaf, Frank Thomas, since obviously he's the cover athlete. Let's see kind of where he sits at this time in October 1991. Still hadn't done the MVPs and all that. Actually, before I do that, let me get into the Ken Griffey one, since I'm going to hit that one first. So our Griffey, which was, I believe, $37 in the previous time, is now up to $50 with an up arrow. So once again, you can already see, again, all that rapid movement happening. And again, that's within months. So let me see if I can find the Frank Thomas here. I want to say it is, yes, in the second series of Leaf. So here's 1990 Leaf, number 2. And if you go right here, card number 300 is Frank Thomas with an up arrow at $50. So in October of 1991, you've got Ken Griffey Jr. with the up arrow at $50, and you've got the 1990 Leaf Frank Thomas, which is $50 with an up arrow. So at this point in time, they're neck and neck, these two young guys, as far as baseball is concerned, for the next big baseball superstar. Both guys will end up in the Hall of Fame, but it's just kind of interesting that at this point in time, they were neck and neck. They were dead even, heading into the late part of the 1991. All right, so let's finish up here. A couple of things I want to cover. We've got the same page here talking about the general information, definitions, different examples of things. However, one thing that wasn't in the previous issue that I want to bring your attention is this one. Here we got a condition guide. We actually have talking about conditions. Now, There's a bunch of stuff I could talk about here. You've got here categorization of defects, a micro defect, a minor defect, a major defect, trying to give a little bit of information here. Now, they do mention that there are visual aids and more detailed descriptions inside of the actual book version, but I'll read you here. A micro defect would be a fuzzy corners, slight off-centering, printer's lines, printer's dots, slightly out of focus, or a slight loss of original gloss. A near mint card may have one micro defect, as an EX mint card may have two or more micro defects. So they try to define it a little bit. Now, one other thing I'll take a second to note here is if you look at the mint card definition here, a card with no defects. A card has sharp corners, even borders, original gloss or shine on the surface, sharp focus in the picture, smooth edges, no signs of wear, and white borders. A mint card, that is a card that is worth mint price, does not have printer's lines or other printing defects. It does not have other serious quality control problems that should be discovered by producing card company before distribution. Note there is no allowance made for the age of the card. So right there, that is the definition in October 1991 of mint. Not gem mint, mint. PSA 9. And 9 for a lot of the other manufacturers as well. It's kind of funny that in 1991, mint meant basically perfect. No allowances for different years, no allowances for any of that. So you can see here, we've still got tons of card shows happening, late 1991. All kinds of ads for them. Filled up page after page after page. And this is just for 1 month worth. Got a little bit, an article here on Wally Joyner. Going to skip past that a little bit. Now, I believe there is also something that I wanted to cover. We got the Baseball Rookie Index. I think there was something in the article that I wanted to talk about for the readers' questions. So here's something about Jeff Bagwell, talking about rookie Jeff Bagwell. Blast from the past with some pictures, similar to what we've done before. These little mini ads for different dealers and such. Then we get here. Here's a good one. Harold Reynolds gets his own feature article, which is kind of interesting. Now, this was an article that I wanted to bring your attention here for a second. So this one here. Is it real? The majority of autographs on the market are authentic. Well, I kind of disagree with that, but I understand what he's getting at. But a little investigative work can help a collector determine if that Joe DiMaggio item was really signed by Joe D or a Joe Blow. And it's a whole article talking about forgeries and autograph problems. And you can see, 32 years ago, we're still having this conversation. One major thing, though, that I would include here is at the beginning, it said the majority of the autographs of the market are authentic. I won't speak for 1991 because I wasn't fully invested into collecting autographs at that time. But there was definitely a ton of fakes on the market. There was already plenty of incentive in the marketplace for people to put tons of fakes out there. And today, it's even more skewed if ever. But it is kind of interesting. And the person who's doing it is a nationally recognized authentication specialist. So it's one of those things where there is a little bit of a reason for them to take that angle on it, that it would make people feel better. And the most disturbing item that showed up, so they talked about a ESPN program that was put on. It was one that's referenced here. ESPN won a cable TV award for the Autograph Game, a program largely focused on forgeries and scams in the hobby. Stop me if this sounds familiar. Several publications such as USA Today, the National Sports Illustrated, along with dozens of local TV stations and newspapers have dedicated space to stories on authentication. The most disturbing item that showed up on the ESPN show, which included an interview with one dealer who estimated that 40% of the autographs he saw in the market were fake. The figure sent hobby-conscious investigative reporters out on the trail to find the real story. Now, realistically, I think probably it was much more than 40%. But nonetheless, obviously, he's taking a contrarian opinion to that. Now, he does talk about here some red flags to look out for, so I'll read a couple. Fakes usually center on superstar players and forgeries of certain players such as Joe DiMaggio, Babe Ruth, Lou Gehrig, and Roger Maris on single-sign baseballs have surfaced in the hobby. Obviously, authentic signed baseballs, these players exist and are in the market, just be wary. Forgers also tend to concentrate on autographs of deceased Hall of Famers. An educated collector can avoid making costly mistakes. And then scrolling ahead, Mickey Mantle, Ted Williams, Jose Canseco, and DiMaggio are just a few of the current hot names that can now cost anywhere from $25 to more than $50 per signature at sports card shows. If only it were such today. Unfortunately, the long lines that shows for these players and the high autograph fees have caused some forgers to sign balls, which are sold at prices below the autograph cost. Common sense would dictate that any real autograph should not be sold for less than the players signing via the show, which I think is a fair point. Moving on here, we've got the ad here for different VHS tapes. And like I said from this article earlier, just bear in mind, 32 years ago, we're still talking about a lot of this stuff, which is interesting. Now here, we get into the Reader's Rights section, which includes a couple of ones that I wanted to look at. So first one here is Save a Tree. I find it difficult to believe the card manufacturers anymore. Topps and Fleer expect people to pay $6 per pack for Stadium Club and $3 per pack for Ultra? They can sell that stuff till there aren't any trees. Let's see how limited they are around World Series time. A card the Topps make for 2 cents and sells wholesale for 5 cents is supposed to resell for 45 cents? Sure, they're going to be limited. It can't last, folks. R.S. Johnson, GA. Well, R.S. Johnson, 32 years later, we'd take $3 and $6 packs for a lot of stuff. Now, what's funny is the $3 per pack in today's money with inflation is actually barely doubled. $3 pack back in 1991 would be about almost $6, $5.80, $5.90, which is funny. I think a lot of people would take $6 a pack, especially with the cost of boxes today. But it is kind of interesting talking about that from that perspective. Now, scrolling ahead a little bit, this was kind of an interesting article talking a little bit about the, and it was interesting that it was posted in the magazine here, talking about, literally it's titled Race Relations, and it's talking about some black players and their price relative to white players like Mickey Mantle and such. I won't read you the whole thing, but it is kind of interesting. Not surprising, but interesting that they brought it up. Now, this next one here, I think is interesting. Minting mantles. So right here. I recently read in the newspaper that a 52 Topps Mickey Mantle card was auctioned off for $59,000. Shouldn't that be in the price in your guide? And that was related to sales that were happening at the time. So you saw when I showed you the price that went from $9,000 in May in the guide to over $20,000 in this version of the guide less than 6 months later. And that's because there were already sales happening well in excess of that. And again, that part of the market was still super hot. So it's just kind of interesting the way the price went in a lot of it. And that was kind of questioning that piece. Now, one other one I'll touch on here is this one. Say no to Ginzu, if you remember the Ginzu knives. I have numerous uncut sheets of 1982 Donruss with all kinds of good cards, including 3 Cal Ripken rookie cards. I've tried to sell them at shows, but no one will buy them. People keep telling me to get them cut up. How would you go about doing that? Is it a smart thing to do? Now, remember, this was written into Beckett. Contact a professional printer or framer to have a sheet of baseball cards cut up. Your uncut sheets are much more scarce, though, which makes them more valuable in the present conditions. I just want to remind you that in the Beckett magazine, the first sentence was, contact a professional printer or framer to have a sheet of baseball cards cut up. So, there you go. That's advice from Beckett in October of 1991. Scanning through, I think there's 1 or 2 other ones that I'll touch on here. So this one here, Out of Hand, is autograph sessions have gotten out of hand. I recently waited 2.5 hours for Willie Mays' autograph, and I was first in line. Mays was just about 2 hours late. When I paid my $18, dramatic pause, I asked if he could put $6.60 under his name. He said no. I realized that the line was quite long and writing additional things under an autograph takes some time, but $18 is an awful lot to spend on an autograph, and some allowances should be made. Not wrong, but I did find it kind of funny. $18, that's outrageous. Again, in today's dollars, that would be, let's just say double. That'd be $36. Who would like to pay $36 for a Willie Mays autograph? I think several of us would. Now, moving forward, let me see here. Something about Conlon collection, if you guys remember those cards. I just like the tone of this one here. Price hostage. I was wondering how I can escape having to pay exorbitant prices at my local card store. I live in a small town with only one card shop. Another problem is the lack of card shows in my area. They're few and far between. How can I get my cards for fair prices? Wouldn't we all like the answer to that? So there you go. All right, finish up here. Starting up, talking about Cecil Field and Ryan Sandberg and how they're moving up at that time. Here's the article on Hank Aaron here to kind of conclude. And that's really it. We finished with Nolan Ryan and Rickey Henderson here, reflecting that Nolan Ryan's 7th no-hitter and Rickey Henderson breaking the stolen base record. He would go on to get almost 500 more stolen bases. Sorry, 400 and change, something like that. And we finished with the back here with Dave Winfield. So that was kind of fun. Some different stuff and some pertinent stuff. The article about forgeries and autographs and everything was kind of funny, given obviously where we're sitting at things. But you can already see, from May 1991 to October 1991, major changes in price movement. Like that was, again, that was still part of the first boom. And that was major price movement, even within a short period of time on commonly traded stuff. The Ken Griffey rookie card, the Frank Thomas rookie card was moving, and obviously the 52 Mantle, which I looked at in the previous issue, we saw that it was already a ton of movement. Within less than 6 months, it had shot up. And there's always a time delay on these because they're getting the information, and this is always a little bit delayed. So by the time this issue would have come out, there might have been even more sales that were pushing that price even further up as you go up the chain. And again, it's always looking at the higher end versions of it. But obviously, you know, a lot of people would be happy to go in their time machine and go back and pay $20,000 for a 52 Mantle in decent condition. So it's just kind of interesting the way that played out. So October 1991, the beginning of an ascent for Frank Thomas as he started becoming a more popular player in the hobby. The next issue that I'm going to look at is 1992, and Frank Thomas will be a cover athlete again as he was still kind of working his way towards those MVP years that were going to be coming further down the line in the future. So that's it for me on this one. It was kind of a fun going through another issue here, and I'll get through some of the other ones as well, and maybe I'll look at some other magazines if there's enough interest in it. Otherwise, hopefully you enjoyed this little trip down memory lane 32 years back in the time machine, seeing where things were kind of sitting at hobby-wise at that time. Otherwise, more videos coming up on the channel. Live streams at 8 p.m. Eastern Time on Fridays. We talk about different hobby-related things. We had some fun on Friday night this past week, and then we've got some more things coming up in the future. That said, like if you like the video, subscribe to the channel. Thanks very much, and we'll catch you in the next one.